Two. Hello, everybody. This is Eric, aka Wolfbitten, and with me is a very good friend, Doran. Doran, thank you for joining us. How are you today?
It's good to be here. I'm doing well. Thank you.
Well, good, good. I know that this is right up your alley, and I'm looking forward to this. You know, today we're going to be discussing. We entitled this "The Science Delusion." What separates credible science from science fiction? And I think that's a very good question today, Duran. What do you think?
I'm with you.
Well, I wanted to bring this off. I'm in my 60s, and I've always been a real fan of science. I've loved science ever since. Oh, Kevin, how you doing, brother? I've always been a real fan of science since I was a school kid, and I actually got into some intelligent arguments with some of my science teachers. I remember one in particular, a science teacher that was telling me that animals have no ability to think. It's like they're not even conscious. And he said everything they do is by instinct. And I'm sorry, but from the time I was a kid, I could look and see the emotion in the eyes of my pets and my dogs, for instance. I've always believed that we've got stories of animals, pets that have actually saved their families. Science has always been a really interesting topic for me. I've noticed, though, a change in science ever since the 1980s, and I'm gonna I'm gonna I want to say first, I believe I know why this change took place. I'll go into that in a little bit. But first, I want to explain the change that I actually saw. Now, from the time I was a kid until 1980, I followed all kinds of science. I didn't care what it was. If it was chemistry, if it was evolution, if it was uh, uh, cosmology, I just loved science. And I didn't always buy into all the hypothetical theories, but I did find it interesting and intriguing, and I studied it. So back then, science was um, it was strict. It had a very high standard of strictness to it. If you couldn't test your theory, if you couldn't put it through a falsification test, it wasn't even considered science. And right around the 1980s, the mid to late 80s, that changed. And I'll tell you what changed it. In 1980, there was a fellow named Guth, uh, Dr. Alan Guth. Now, he's a brilliant fellow. He was MIT. Uh, he had tenure there. He was a theoretical science. And I do find theoretical science intriguing, very interesting, like Kaku and men of his caliber. But right about the 1980, the end of 1980 and the early part of 1981, Dr. Alan Guth published his first paper on eternal, eternal expansion, and it was an interesting paper. Now, what he was trying to do at the time, there was this massive argument about the Big Bang Theory. The Big Bang, for some reason, well, for a couple of reasons, mathematically it didn't work out. And there was something wrong with it. But they didn't scrap it because it was a good idea and it had a lot of merit. And yet they couldn't get things to work out. There was two problems with it in particular that they called they called horizon and flatness. Now, flatness was just what it sounds like. The universe appears to be like a disc shape, a flat plane. That's what they believe that it is, and they don't understand why. Because if there really was a sudden expansion, a big bang, you would expect that to be, equal pressure all the way around. In other words, it would blow up like a balloon, like a ball, into a big round thing. But instead of big and round, we have something that blew out, but then it flattened. And the other thing is called horizon. And this is basically, you've heard the argument for fine tuning, the fine tuning of the universe.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, because of these two things, they needed an answer. And so Dr. Guth was trying to solve these two problems. And in his paper, he states right there in the beginning, in the opening, in the abstract, the first paragraph, he says that this is an attempt to explain flatness. He wasn't trying to explain horizon, just the flatness. And he says we could probably answer that problem of flatness if we had a huge sudden expansion of great heat, a great superheated sudden expansion, faster than the speed of light and so hot you just can't imagine the heat. But then all of a sudden it puts on the brakes and it keeps expanding a little bit, but it puts on the brakes enough to where it starts to cool and it flattens. That sudden coolness causes it to flatten, like a deflate.
Yeah.
And he says, it's a beautiful idea, but unfortunately, it doesn't really work out. The mathematics don't really work out. So a lot of people jumped on board with that, and they thought, well, this is still an interesting idea, and it does make a lot of sense. And so several of these theoretical scientists got together with Guth, and they wrapped it all up with string theory then.
Mm-hmm.
So you had the Big Bang combined with eternal inflation, are all wrapped up in string theory. And when they came out with this, it was about 1983. Some scientists were just amazed and overjoyed. And this is actually what led to the idea of multiverses. And that's when the idea, and that was such a super fantastic, and this is a great title for today's program, what separates science from science fiction, because the criticism against this from some very notable scientists was, you can't put this crap to the test. They said, hey, it's a great story, it's super science fiction, but you can't put it to the test. There's no way to falsify this.
Yeah.
So what they began to do, a lot of people just jumped off the bandwagon. Some very notable scientists just absolutely abandoned the idea and worked against it. They lobbied against it. They joined together and lobbied against it. But a lot of people jumped on board with it because it did present some, the theories like multiverses, and they just love those ideas.
Yeah.
And, so they ran with it.
Yeah.
Now, the unfortunate thing for the idea is that none of it became testable ever, but some of the predictions became testable. One of the predictions, for instance, was they predicted supersymmetry, which is pretty much what it sounds like. You have a supersymmetrical design to the universe because of this superheated inflation. So there should have been some sort of supersymmetry to this, but the predictions of supersymmetry were falsified by CERN in several tests, 5 tests that occurred between 2013 and 2015. So you can still pull up the articles if anybody wants to pull up the articles. Just type in "supersymmetry fails CERN," Google that, or "scientists need a new theory for everything CERN," Google that. Some of these articles will pull up for you. But so even though it's failed, now they fix it up. They haven't replaced the theory. They're fixing it up with dark matter and dark energy, saying dark matter and dark energy is greatly responsible for some of the mysteries and things that aren't working out.
Yeah, sure.
So they keep adding to it and adding to it and adding to it. Now, I've got my own theory on dark matter and dark energy, but that's another story. The thing is, though, as it stands, this inflation is a wonderful idea, but it's failed, and they're still holding it. We're still using the very same model of the universe, and it's still directly testable, and so it's still science fiction, and yet we treat it as though it's science. But I've noticed at that point, I like to use the phrase "science became spoiled," because now they're downplaying the need for falsification to separate science from science fiction. Um, Another thing that we have, another good example, I think, is with evolution. They're trying to protect paradigms, and I understand that. They like these ideas. They want to protect the paradigm. I understand that. I have no problem with that, but I just wish they could be more honest. Because with transitional fossils, for instance, Dr. Colin Paterson, British Museum of Natural History senior paleontologist back in the day, he was on lecture circuits regarding evolution. He was an evolutionist. He wrote books on evolution. But when he was asked, why don't you talk about transitional fossils? He says, well, I don't talk much about them. I don't put pictures of them in my books because he said basically it's easy enough to make up stories about why one thing would be favored over another, and how this could be ancestor to this and this could be descended from that. He says, but this is science fiction because there's no way to put them to the test. He literally said, this is not a part of science. Quote, this is not a part of science because there's no way to put them to the test. Unquote. Yeah. But it's not like that now that we've gone through the 80s and the side that was standing for science fiction won. The people that were fighting for falsifiable hard science lost.
Yeah. I think a lot of that, I mean, I would say, just based on my studies in the philosophy of science, and I did a lot of work in the philosophy of science when I was in graduate school at Arizona State University. And, I would really push the date back for that quite a bit further, which is maybe back to the 1960s, or maybe the 1950s, when there was a famous paper written. I'm going to not be able to remember the name of it, but it was up to that point, the dominant philosophy of science had been something called logical positivism. Logical positivism said that there's no meaning, the only meaningful statements are those that can be empirically verified. So if there was value to theory that wasn't directly connected to sense experience, it was only valuable because it could ultimately be an implication, so that some fact about sense experience could ultimately be some sort of an implication of the theory. So everything is tied to sense, to sensory verification, or verification through instruments, or some way of directly verifying. And there was a paper written and kind of a movement against that, that thought that was way too simplistic and was actually, it was self-defeating, because the thought was, well, if your rule is going to be that the only meaningful statement is a statement that's empirically verifiable, is that statement empirically verifiable? How are you going to verify that? And so once that was realized, that logical positivist program was untenable, then there arose some competing philosophies of science, and probably the most influential was that of Thomas Kuhn, who wrote that famous book called The Structure of Scientific Revolution. And he pointed out that in practice, the scientific project was more about what you mentioned, which was about constructing a paradigm that a community of scientists can then get behind as a research program, as a general orientation towards reality. And even if it makes predictions that are falsified, those can be held on. The whole paradigm can be held on to by simply making these little adjustments here and there. So, like the classic example everybody knows about is the Ptolemaic model of the solar system, where in order to hang on to that, you had to have the planets making these little epicycles and stuff. It was very inelegant, kind of clunky, but we held on to it because it had value to the culture. It seemed to be the model that was preferred by our spiritual tradition. It seemed to be the one that was preferred by the ancient authors, for whom there was a very great amount of respect. And it seemed so. For all these reasons, we held on to it until the explanatory value of the Copernican system just became too compelling, and the paradigm eventually collapsed. And so I think that is what is happening now with, I actually think that's what's happening now with the theory of evolution, which is that, just reading just recently, just as one little example of the untenability of that theory, which is that, in order to be able to get the kinds of proteins that you need in order to build molecules in living systems, you need a sequence of amino acids in a very specific, there's like 100 of them or something like that, in a very specific arrangement. And in order to get that by chance, the odds are about the same as finding a single grain of sand in the Sahara 3 times in a row.
Yeah.
So what do? So you come up with fixes for that. Well, I'm going to patch it up over here. It's leaking. The theory is leaking here. Oh my God, you patch it here, and then it starts leaking over here, and you can patch it there. And eventually, for anomalies and failures in the theory, it just becomes too much. And eventually it's replaced by something else. And I think that the problem is that the scientific community doesn't have something else. I think that's a project.
Yes.
There's intelligent design and there are guided evolution and stuff like that. I don't think the scientific community is really crazy about that. I don't think that the alternative has really appeared in the way that it did in Copernicus's time, when he had a really compelling alternative paradigm that was waiting in the wings and could swoop in and replace it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Richard Dawkins, in his book, The Blind Watchmaker, he's talking about the differences that he and Gould have between them. Of course, Richard Dawkins is a gradualist. Gould came up with punctuated equilibrium.
Yeah.
And he's talking about the differences that they have, but he was also speaking about where they agree. Now, because of this, you have to. He's taking this back to the Cambrian explosion, and he's noting the fossils, and he admits, and Gould admits that there's huge gaps there that they just can't account for, and they both note, and most evolutionary teachers believe the same way. They'll make the admission that all of these species appear suddenly and fully formed. And Dawkins makes the interesting comment that they appear without any evolutionary history. And he's talking about how the sudden appearance of these fully developed species with no apparent evolutionary history is it's perplexing to the punctuationist as it is to the gradualist. And he says that the only thing that it really seems to back is the creationist.
Oh, okay.
And he makes that statement, but then he goes on to say, "But we reject that idea."
Yeah.
Now, in my opinion, at that point, it no longer becomes science. At that point, if you're just trying to protect your paradigm, it's no longer science.
Yeah.
Science isn't biased. So I think at that point they ought to at least say, okay, creation, intelligent design does have merit. It does have its merit. They should at least be honest. If they can be honest and say, look, this favors the creationists, but we just reject it. We're not even going to entertain the idea. We're just going to throw it off the table, and we're going to keep our little theories right here, first and foremost, and not even consider anything else.
Yeah. Well, that's always such an important point, is that, in any kind of discussion about fundamental matters, whether it's theology or anything else, it's so important to consider basic assumptions. So the basic assumption on the part of the scientific community is going to be materialism, and methodological naturalism. If you begin there, of course, you can't allow a transcendent intelligence as part of your explanation. You have to begin with stuff, material stuff, with bits and pieces and atoms and molecules and fundamental and subatomic particles and forces, and then you need to literally construct a story. And no matter how no matter how absurd some of the consequences become, you are obligated to stick with it. Just think about the question of first causes, for example. What serious-minded physicists are telling us is that the ultimate explanation of the universe is that it just came into existence for no reason. Obviously, to anyone with even a shred of rationality, that's going to seem like a completely nonsense explanation.
Yeah.
What else are you going to start with? What else could your explanation be other than something like that? We know for sure that the universe had a beginning.
Yep.
Well, if you're going to exclude a creator, then what do you have to say? You're going to have to say that matter is self-creating.
Yeah.
They
do try to say that. They try to say nothing was something.
Right. Nothing was something. Right. Yeah. There's nothing. And then all of a sudden, boom, it explodes. What? What is that? What could that possibly mean? I don't know.
Yeah. And we've got an interesting question here from Connor McLeod. Connor wants to know, Eric, could I just ask your opinion on the link I sent you? Why are babies now being born with no wisdom teeth, extra bones in their feet and legs, and holding on to the median artery?
File that one under news to me.
Yeah.
Heard that.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
I don't know why. I don't know if that's even true. I mean,
Yeah.
is going to be true in some babies, I'm sure. We get all kinds of different aspects of the human body that are brought to us every day. We have all different sorts. Mutations occur. Okay, I do know that mutations occur. Now that doesn't mean that we can, because of that, we can trace all life back to the last universal common ancestor, the hypothetical last universal common ancestor. I believe adaptation occurs, but that doesn't mean that we can trace all life back to a last universal common ancestor. That's quite a jump.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite a jump to take Darwin's observations of, say, the finches, for instance, and take that back to a last universal common ancestor, and then take that back to the first universal common ancestor, and take that back to abiogenesis. That's a huge jump.
Mm.
So, no, I don't think anybody in their right mind would say uh, adaptation doesn't occur. But here's something that you should also understand: adaptation goes back and forth. And this is something that they just kind of avoid. Darwin's finches went back and forth. Uh, the beaks on these finches, some years they would be longer than others. Some years they'd be shorter than others, shorter and fatter and thicker, or longer and more slender and sleek. And that basically had to do with their food sources. Uh, what they had to do to actually obtain their food. But that went back and forth, you see. It wasn't just Darwin noticed a one-way change. He didn't stick around long enough to see it go back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
So we have different adaptations in human beings, for instance, but we're still human beings. Um,
Yeah.
if I could, let me draw your attention too to Connor. When I was a child, they taught that Neanderthal was the ancestor to Homo sapien, and they didn't even know about Denisovan. Recently, what was it? Within the last decade, they found out about the Denisovan. Uh, Roughly the last decade. So, what they found out, though, there are some things that they're able to test. Let me give you an even better example. Uh, we used to put on the phylogenetic tree the dire wolf as the precursor to all modern wolves. And they just swore this was the truth. The dire wolf is the ancestor to all living wolves. Google this if you don't believe me. We now have the DNA of the dire wolf, and guess what? It's not even related to the wolf.
Mm.
Not even related, let alone an ancestor.
Yeah.
And because we have the DNA of the um, Neanderthal and the Denisovan, and of course Homo sapien, the one thing that we found out is that no, they're not our cousins, nor are they our predecessors, because we all interbred and produced fertile offspring. Neanderthal, Homo sapien, Denisovan, they interbred together. We interbred with them, and all of their offspring and our offspring interbred with one another. I read an interesting article the other day. No, it wasn't an article. I'm sorry. Uh, um, Gutsick Gibbon. She's a YouTuber, an evolutionist, a scientist, and she's on Modern Day Debate a lot. Uh, she came out with this thing on, um, oh gosh, what was it? Well, anyway, uh, the point is, we interbred with here's what it was: Homo sapiens with the that have the heaviest amount of Neanderthal genes in them don't get COVID very easily.
Hmm.
And when they do, it's not that serious. But people without this Neanderthal gene get COVID much more easily, and the symptoms are always worse. So, you see, this proves we interbred. No, that wasn't Gusset, but that was Kaylee, another scientist, a YouTuber scientist, Kaylee, Kayleigh, if you want to look her up. But I found that was a really interesting point. All of these things, the DNA and etc., proves that we interbred and we produce fertile offspring, which proves that we are the same species.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But, Connor, you're not going to hear that taught in schools or the universities or admitted in scientific journals, even though there's a huge number of scientists that are saying this, promoting it, and demanding that it has to be true. That according to this 300-year-old definition that predates Darwin, we are the same species.
Mm.
So you have all of these things. And not only is DNA showing that um, evolution is highly unlikely. We have um, evolution DNA through Craig Venter. Craig Venter is probably the foremost leading, well-known, most respected geneticist in the world. And he has come out and said that there is no tree of life of common descent. Now, that's a staple of evolution, the tree of life of common descent. He says DNA proves this. Now, Richard Dawkins balked at that, but he just laughed at it. Richard Dawkins sounds like a mouse. They're sitting in this panel, all of them atheists. Craig Venter's an atheist and an evolutionist. And yet he declares that there is no tree of life of common descent.
Mm.
So all of these things that evolution is teaching you is provably wrong. Mary Schweitzer came out with the paper on the soft tissues.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Yes.
according to her very own paper, she was able to increase the stability or the half-lives of these biological materials by 200-fold. She was working with blood proteins, seeing how long she could preserve them. And 200-fold was what she was able to get. Now, if you do the math, Connor, if you do the math, you know that after 10 half-lives, we basically have nothing left of whatever elements you're testing or biological material. It's basically gone. The way it works is 50% gone at the end of the first half-life. You've only got 25% of it left at the second half-life, 12.5% at the third. So by the time you get down to the 10th, you have like 0.2% of something left on the average. That's why we don't C14 test anything that's over like 55 or 60,000 years old, because there should be no C14 left in it. And yet, when you take collagen, like for instance, there's several types of collagen. They found some of the soft tissues that they found in dinosaur bones were vascular collagen. They found blood veins, red blood cells in the tracks. So there's vascular collagen, but that's only got like a 60 to 70 day half life. If you use the cartilage or the The collagen that comes from cartilage, though, it's got a 117-year half-life. Okay, now do this math. 117 years times 10 half-lives. That's 1,170 years. Multiply that by Mary's 200-fold. You should have none of it left. But the oldest it could possibly be is 234,000 years old. You get that by 1,170 years.
Mm-hmm.
Multiply
At the extreme outside.
Yeah,
right.
at the extreme oldest, that's the oldest it could be.
And that evidence, I mean, it just straightforwardly smashes the paradigm.
Yes, it does.
Of 66 million, at a 66 million years being the when the very last Triceratops should have been in existence on the Earth.
Now they found this in Triceratops horn, T-Rex leg bone, and a hadrosaur leg bone. Yeah. The hadrosaur is said to be 80 million years old.
Mm.
So if you want to get back to 80 million years, you got a half-life of 117 years, you need a 680,000-fold increase. She got a 200-fold increase. 680,000-fold increase would have taken you back 80 million years. If they'd have come up with that, I'd say, okay, cool, I can deal with that.
Yeah.
Doesn't hurt my faith at all, Right. But they didn't.
Yeah.
But this does hurt the faith of the evolutionist because they have no way to explain it now. You, according to the numbers, you can't have 80 million years.
Yeah.
The most you can have is 234,000. Now, you can't have evolution from a theropod dinosaur to the Archaeopteryx to the modern bird in 234,000 years. You can't have mankind goes back that far, we say. They say 234,000 years. So you can't have a common ancestor for mankind and for a chimp in 234,000 years. You cannot have that. You cannot go from the dog-sized Pakicetus land-dwelling mammal to the modern whale in 234,000. That ain't happening, dude.
Yeah. Well, this is the kind of thing that stresses paradigms until they eventually it becomes too much and they just collapse.
Yeah.
Like the theory of the ether, for example. I mean, it just became, you try to patch it up, you try to come up with fixes for it, and ad hoc explanations and stuff like that. And eventually they just go, okay, fine, we'll accept relativity. Never mind. And then the whole scientific community has to adapt. And then a whole paradigm, it flops over into a new paradigm.
Connor thinks we danced around his question. I don't think we danced around it at all.
Hey, Connor, maybe if I'll take a look at the. I'm sorry, I didn't see the link, so I'm not quite sure what you were asking. So I apologize if it seemed like that was the case.
Yeah. Well, like I said, if there's anything happening with some of these babies, I said adaptation occurs. Well, what's wrong with the truth? That does not mean evolution occurred.
Is that what you figure Connor is aiming at here? He's taking what he said to be evidence for evolution?
Well, I think that's what he's trying to say. I don't know.
Maybe Connor can tell us in the comments, and then we can get him a better explanation or a better answer.
Yeah, Connor.
We aim to please on this show.
Yeah, anything you want to bring up, feel free. I would even bring you on if you would like to come on. Let me put this in here, and if you would like to come on and discuss this, we're happy to. Here you go. All you have to do is click that link there anytime. If you'd like to come on, Connor, you're invited. If you don't want to, that's fine too. If you'd like to just rephrase your question in the comment, feel free to do that.
Yeah, because I'm not familiar with the phenomenon that he's referring to. So,
yeah, babies being born with no wisdom teeth.
Yeah.
Extra bones in the feet and legs, and holding onto the median artery.
Let's see.
Yeah.
I'll be like that guy on Joe Rogan who looks up all his stuff. Jamie, let's see.
Yeah.
Jamie, can you look into that? Okay, let's see. Babies, no wisdom teeth. I don't know. We'll see what we got. More babies are being born without wisdom teeth. Oh, as humans continue to evolve at a rapid rate. Aha, maybe that's where he's.
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay. So yeah.
okay. Well, I'll look into it. I'm interested. I
Yeah.
don't mean to evade anything.
Yeah. Yeah. We're still human. And this does not, by any means, even hint that we go back to a last universal common ancestor. You know, just like Darwin's finches, their beaks change. They still change today. They go back and forth,
Mm-hmm.
but they're still finches. They're not losing their wings. They're not developing tails. Uh,
Yeah.
you know, they're still finches.
The grasshoppers down here are the color of the desert. The grasshoppers from where I'm from, Minnesota, are green.
Mm-hmm.
I mean that's but grasshoppers, right?
Yeah, for over 100 years now, we've also done experimentations with fruit flies,
Yes,
and
yeah, right.
we have irradiated them. We have put them through every sort of torture you can imagine, and separated the ones that mutated, and tried to get that mutation to continue to turn it into anything but a fruit fly. Most of them either uh, turn right back into the original fruit fly, just like they were before, or they die out, or they're not they can't reproduce. So, but the point is, after millions, literally millions of generations, they were still fruit flies. Nothing ever changed. So, and we're talking about a lifespan of days. So it's that was a really really good test.
Hmm.
So yeah, I don't think that means anything, Connor. To say that this proves evolution is a stretch. It's a stretch. So you know, especially when Craig Venter says there is no tree of life of common descent. Now, here's an atheist saying this. Um, and you have to deal with the fact that the longest that anybody has ever been able to preserve these tissues are 200-fold. You're stuck with that. There's not a scientific paper out there that you can present that gives you more time than that. That's a fact of science that you are going to be stuck with. So, you know, is would you like to rephrase your question, Connor? If you would, you're welcome to.
In the meantime, here's something interesting. This is something that I found about what Craig is talking about. If I may, a
Mm-hmm.
new study published in the Journey of Anatomy found that humans are increasingly being born without wisdom teeth. Researchers found that the median artery in the forearm, which used to form in the womb but disappear after birth, is sticking around more often after birth. These changes are showing up far more often than typical human evolution would suggest, and indicates that the human race may be evolving faster than it has at any point in the last 250 years. But here's a quote. This is what we call microevolution of modern humans, said Dr. Tegan Lucas, a professor at the College of Medicine and Public Health at Flinders University in Adelaide, Australia, who worked on the study. So they're even calling, the authors of the study are even calling this microevolution and not macroevolution.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Simple adaptation is all it is.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So I think that's where we're at with that.
yeah,
Excuse me.
macroevolution occurs. We refer to that as adaptation. So things do adapt. Sometimes things even speciate. For instance, you'll have one population of an animal, like crayfish, for instance. Uh, Back about 5 or 6 years ago, there was a segment of the crayfish population that speciated. They were no longer able to reproduce and fertile offspring with the parent population. But they didn't evolve into anything else, and they don't appear to be evolving into anything else. When things like this happen, uh, history, nature, uh, generally shows that they just go extinct. At least that segment of the population. We see them die out. We don't see them evolving into any other type of an animal. So
Yeah.
We have another interesting phenomenon too. The misclassification of animals, I believe, uh, is many times done intentionally to try to give you the appearance of evolution where there is none. For instance, um, if we understand that the biological definition of a species is a group of animals that are capable of interbreeding and producing fertile offspring, then you have to ask, why did they classify coyotes different from gray wolves as a
Mm.
totally different species?
Yeah. Good
Uh,
question.
yeah, because coyotes are able to interbreed and produce fertile offspring. We have coy wolves and we have coy dogs. Now, gray wolves and dogs are the same species. They're able to interbreed and produce fertile offspring, but so are coyotes. Coyotes can do the very same thing with them. So
Mm.
uh, that's just an interesting phenomenon. I think that uh, you know I don't have any degrees, and if I notice things like this, then I know these people with degrees notice things like this. They understand these are classified differently. Why? But you're not going to hear an answer as to why. Why are they trying to say that man is evolved from or a cousin to the Neanderthal and the Denisovan when
Yeah.
we're obviously not?
Yeah. Well, I would really encourage anybody who's interested in these matters, not only to study the sciences, science is obviously really important to know, but also to study the philosophy of science, because there are people who look under the hood of the whole scientific process. And when you do that, you really find that things are a whole lot less solid than you might think. And
Yes.
there's a whole lot more guessing and saying it's just so than you might think. It's a lot less. It really is a more of a shaky edifice than you might believe. I mean, like just in recent years, um, to take a unrelated example, but I think it's still illustrative because this was really backed by the scientific and medical community, which was the whole phenomenon of heart stents. For a long time, it was thought that a heart stent was absolutely a medical necessity, and how many billions of dollars were spent and how many hours of surgery were performed. And then it turns out that heart stents have almost no medical utility at all. you know?
Wow.
and
Wow.
yet and yet it was backed by medical schools and backed by um, it was backed by the scientific community. There's lots of examples like that,
Well,
from all.
thanks for that bit of information. I just got two heart stents.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Wow.
mean, it's kind of interesting to look into the history of it. That the science behind that is a lot less solid than you might think. Um, and that's the case across science.
Yeah.
Not,
That's a great point though, because I happen to know, because I study this very thing. There's a huge fight among scientists, but you wouldn't know it by reading the journals. You wouldn't know it by reading the published papers. But when they get together and they're talking behind closed doors, there's a huge fight among scientists to get Neanderthals and etc. reclassified as Homo sapiens. Um, And I'll give you a good example. If you remember back again 5 or 6 years ago, roughly, when the news broke about the oldest Neanderthal cave paintings in the world that go back 50 or 60,000 years. Um, there was I believe it was National Geographic that did a special on that, and they were interviewing, I believe he was a French scientist, and this French scientist said that cognitively, there's absolutely no difference between the Neanderthal and the Homo sapien, and that the fact that Denisovans had jewelry that was finely made, and the Neanderthals had this cave art that exceeded that of the most Homo sapiens. So we already know that bodily speaking, they have we were able to interbreed, and that we're very, very similar. They're heavier built than we are, but still very, very similar. But you see, we have differences too between the European and the Zulu and the Pygmy, and yet they're all Homo sapien who are able to. Now, I want to point out something too. You don't realize this, but evolution is even racist. Um, there were back in the 1800s. Uh, there were people that were hunting white people that were hunting the Aboriginals and decapitating them, and boiling the flesh off their heads, and emptying it of the brain, and using them for displays of evolution to show the evolution of mankind. Uh, that's sad.
Yeah.
And even today, when you think about it, think about the title of Darwin's book, The Favored Races. Now, the evolutionary teaching teaches that we began in Africa as the black man. Now, this is becoming provably wrong nowadays, by the way.
Yes.
But they teach the evolution that we started off as black men and we evolved into white people.
Yeah.
Eventually. So that makes us one of the favored races when it comes right down to it. Now, that's just and Connor, you just said things do adapt. Yeah, yeah. So how does that spell evolution? You're jumping again. You're jumping. You don't even have time to make that jump. You've got to show me how you're going to do all this in 234,000 years. Or you're going to have to come up with a paper that shows you can extend the soft tissue longer. Or you're going to have to prove that Craig Venter, the man that mapped the human genome before even teams of government scientists and corporate scientists could, you're going to have to prove him wrong. Craig Venter, by the way, such a brilliant person, he was the very first person in the world. He did what universities still can't do. He actually extracted the DNA out of a E. coli bacteria cell. Extracted his DNA. He wrote his own DNA program on his computer, built this DNA, and injected it back into that E. coli bacteria cell. And it started reproducing. Now, you see, this is the man that's telling you there is no tree of life of common descent. To this day, nobody else has reproduced this, been able to do that. Nobody else. Craig Venter is the only man that's ever been able to do that.
It'd be interesting to know what his theory is then, his alternative theory, especially if he's an atheist.
Yeah, well, it seems to be that he describes it as a in one article, he described a forest of life and then again a bush of life. But he seems to believe that abiogenesis occurred more than once,
Wow.
which to
Okay.
me, that's an even more incredible idea.
Yeah.
You know,
It is, right?
it
Yeah.
is because the one thing that we note today, if you're going to go by observation, abiogenesis does not occur. Um, if you're going to note every point out a life form, I don't care what it is, every single life form you can point out, none of it just randomly formed and popped to life.
Yeah.
It always, every single one came from a prior life form.
Yeah. Life comes from life.
Yeah, life brings forth life. Consciousness brings forth consciousness. Intelligence brings forth intelligence. These are the things we observe.
Yeah.
And these are the things that favor creation. Just like Dawkins said, all these species in the fossil record that just appear fully formed, these things favor the creationists too.
Mm.
So, you know, it's very unscientific to throw creation off the table. If you want to believe in evolution, I'm not going to down you for it. You're entitled. But I will say, um, if you throw creation off the table, you're biased and you're not practicing science, and you're not even paying heed to the observations that we make.
Yeah. And you're involving yourself in increasingly fantastic ad hoc hypotheses, which is what happens when you're trying to defend, a paradigm that's just not defensible.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and I wanted to mention something else, Eric, just make you feel a little bit better about heart stents. What I said, I actually was misremembering a little bit. I pulled this up from Stanford. I just want to get this out there. I don't want to put out misinformation, but it says that patients with severe but stable heart disease who are treated with medications and lifestyle advice alone are no more at risk of a heart attack or death than those who undergo invasive surgical procedures, according to a large federally funded clinical trial led by researchers at the Stanford School of Medicine and New York University's Medical School. The trial did show, however, that among patients with coronary artery disease who had symptoms of angina, chest pain caused by restricted blood flow to the heart, treatment with invasive procedures such as stents or bypass was more effective at relieving symptoms and improving quality of life. So
Oh, well,
you're good. You're good.
thank you. Yeah, because I've got the best heart medicines right here.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah, yeah. That's awesome now.
Okay, good.
Okay. Connor wants to know, is that guy a God lover? Well, we both are, Connor. Uh,
I am.
but
Yes, I am
that
God.
doesn't. I'd like to know if you think that makes us any less able to understand science. Uh, and if because of that you would reject the information that we're giving you because that's totally unscientific. Now, what I do challenge you to do, Connor, I challenge you to listen to this again, and I challenge you to look up everything that we've said touching science. I'll tell you what I'd be happy to do. I would be happy to bring you on anytime, and we can go over Mary's paper where she talks about increasing the stability of soft tissues 200%, 200 fold. Also, let me ask you something, Connor. Ask yourself this: when is the first time you ever heard? When is the last time, or the first time you ever heard of soft tissue in a dinosaur bone? I'm going to guarantee you it was after 2005. Guarantee you. Now, I'm glad to hear you say that. Science is science, no matter where it comes from. Exactly. So, Connor, listen to this point for a second, buddy, and check it out. The first time you heard of soft tissue in a dinosaur bone was 2005 or later. Uh, some people didn't hear of it until about 2013. Mary's paper came out in 2014. Now, here's what's so interesting about this. If you read the abstract and you see, first of all, that they were able to increase this stability by 200 fold, then you go down to the introduction. Here's the important part now. The second important part. The 200 fold is very important for a timeline. But the second point is important because there's been a conspiracy to hide this information from you. Mary says that we've been finding soft tissue in the dinosaur bones, soft tissue in dinosaur bones, soft tissue in plant fossils, go clear back to the Mesozoic since the 1960s. You hear that? Now, you never heard it. We never heard it. Nobody ever heard of this until 2005. Nobody in the public, which means that they've been hiding this from the public since the 1960s. Now, why would they hide this from the public if this is science, dude? I'll tell you why. Because it ruins the paradigm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it might not even be an active case of let's hide this. It's just this doesn't fit. Let's ignore it. You
Yeah.
know, just filter the thing out. You know.
Yep. Connor wants to know. You say you can prove God. Let's hear it. Well, that's going to take. You're not going to be able to have both topics in one show. But I will say this because my friend here, Doran, has to leave very shortly. But I will say that, as a matter of fact, I'm infringing on his time as it is. But let me say this. Yes, that's right, Connor. If you don't think it's a conspiracy to hide that information from you, then tell me why nobody ever heard of it until 2005 and after. Nobody did. So yeah, they kept it from us. Okay. I'm a 60-year-old man. I know they kept this from us. I'm a 60-year-old man that loves science, and I know they kept this from us. So, but let me say this: you want to see, ask yourself which makes more sense. Okay, where does the evidence point to begin with? If what we observe is that life brings forth life, intelligence brings forth intelligence, consciousness brings forth consciousness, then this already favors God over abiogenesis. When we observe that life does not randomly form and just pop to life, you don't have little biological machines forming the hardware and the software in the same body and just pop into life. It don't happen, dude. We don't observe it. We can't make it happen in the lab. So, that in itself favors God. Then, when you understand, if you look into, for instance, what is intelligence? What is consciousness? Where does it come from? Nobody knows how to explain it. And yet, here we are possessing it. Okay. Science can't understand it. Science cannot tell you why anything like that would evolve, or much less how it evolved. They're clueless as to how consciousness evolved. Now, then, when you also consider, you have uh, uh, genetics, proving that there is no tree of life of common descent. This favors creation. This favors creation, period. It doesn't favor evolution as evolution is taught. So when you consider all the breakdowns of when you consider all the breakdowns in science, when it comes to evolution, all the shortcomings, you see, you've got so many questions that you can't answer, so many things that proves evolution cannot be, and yet look, Connor, it's like you're trying to hold on to it desperately. That should show you something in itself. Why are you so desperate to hold on to it?
Yeah.
Why is it so hard for you to accept scientific fact?
I would really, if I could just break in, Eric, real quick before I have to go, I would just recommend to Connor or to anybody listening who's who's convinced about evolution, is just to do an experiment, which is an experiment that I did when I was in graduate school. And I was going to set out, because I was an avowed atheist when I began graduate school, like my first year of it. And so I was annoyed with creationists because I came from a creationist background. So I was kind of even though I was in graduate school, I was still a bit of a period of rebellion against my upbringing, even though I was a little older. Yeah. But I made the experiment that I'm going to go out and I'm going to find the evidence for evolution that is absolutely irrefutable. Like, lay it out in a way that it's going to convince the toughest skeptic that it's true. That's what I went looking for. And it was that experience that proved to me that evidence did not, in fact, exist, if you are honest.
Amen.
You know, if you're driven by something else, if you're driven by a desire to have a worldview that excludes the spiritual, then no amount of evidence is going to convince you that evolution is not true. But if you take an honest look at the evidence and really try to lay it out in a way that somebody who's looking at it dispassionately isn't going to be able to deny it, try to do that. I challenge you. And you might be very surprised at what you find.
I think that he believes, Connor says, Eric, even the other guy talking about you, Doran, is rolling his eyes every time you open your mouth.
I am? No, I'm going, I think what he's seeing is I'm going back and forth between my little camera and looking at the screen. So I'm not, I swear I'm not rolling my eyes.
Oh, I know you're not. See, Doran believes the same thing I believe. And that's why we're doing this show together. God is not scientific fact, yes or no? Evolution is not scientific fact, that's for sure. And God is much more provable than evolution, that's for sure. As a matter of fact, I could give you lots of science that points to God and that tears down what you believe at the very same time. So, anytime you want to come on, you're invited, Gunnar. I'll treat you good. I won't treat you bad. But I'm gonna ask you one thing. Quit being so biased. Look at the truth. Look at the facts before you. Okay? To me, I get the impression that you're desperately clinging, trying to hang on to and preserve evolution in your own mind. That's the impression I get. And when you're not willing to look at the facts, you're not willing to say, hey, they've got a point here. Show you. Well, I think, Connor, we've shown you enough for this program. If you take this and you study it out, and then next program, we will show you God. Okay?
Might be surprised at what you find if you do consider the evidence. It's really true.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, Connor, I'm going to challenge you. You're not a bad guy. Okay? I don't care too much for your friends, and I'll admit that. They're a bunch of trolls, bunch of ignorant trolls. But I like you. Now, if you what facts, we've gone over a lot of facts in this very program. If you don't even know what facts we've given you, then you've not paid attention. And you've just blown it off. You're not even listening. So I'm going to challenge you to listen again. And I'm going to challenge you to look up everything that we say here. And I'm going to challenge you to see what the facts are for yourself if you don't even know what facts we've given you already. I'm going to challenge you to prove me wrong, prove Doran wrong in all the facts that we've laid before you. And then next time we do a show, I'll bring you on anytime you want to come on, and we will talk about God, my friend. So, Doran, thank you so very much, my friend.
My pleasure.
I told Doran I would have him out here by 4, and look at this.
That's all right.
I am so
No,
sorry.
it was fun. It was fun. I appreciate the opportunity to come on. It was a good time. Good conversation.
Well, I enjoyed it, and I'm so glad to have you. Thank you so very much. And everybody, thank you for joining in. Thank you for watching. Good News Gospel, my brother, my friend. I love you, man. Thank you for being here. And I'd love to join you for a beer this afternoon. We'll see. God bless you all. Thank you, Doran. I'm going to give you last word here, brother. Say whatever you'd like.
Oh, I just appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk about these things. I'm fascinated, and they're definitely important topics. That's for sure.
Well, you guys have a great day, and thank you, my brother. This is Eric and Doran. We are out. God bless you.